You are muted, Joan.
Yes, sorry. Good day to everyone, and thank you for joining us in this webinar, Women at the Frontline, a conversation with Indigenous women at risk for defending their lands, rights, and dignity. We have four speakers from different indigenous communities and countries who will be telling us their stories as frontline defenders, particularly of the rights of indigenous peoples to their lands, territories, and resources. We also have reactors who will be providing their response, including also on their work in relation to women's rights. Yeah, and before I continue, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Joan Carling, an indigenous Kankanae from the Cordillera, Philippines, and I work with the Indigenous Peoples Rights International, or IPRI. This event is being co-organized by IPRI, by Foro Internacional de Mujeres Indígenas, or the International Alliance of Indigenous Women, and the International Work Group on Indigenous Affairs, and the Land Rights Now campaign. So these are the organizations that that has put together this event. Before I continue, I would just like to acknowledge that the chairwoman of the CEDAW is here with us, Gladys Acosta Vargas, and so she will be speaking after our four speakers. So not to waste time, I would like to call on Teresa Zapeta. She is the executive director of FIMI, the International Network of Indigenous Women, to give us the opening remarks. Teresa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Joan, and good morning, everyone. I will speak in Spanish now. Buenos días a cada una de ustedes. Muy bienvenidas y bienvenidos a este evento
this event, which we have which we host and which have organized really wholeheartedly. It's dedicated to all the women, to all the youngsters, and even to the very young women who are fighting for their rights and for their to care for their natural resources. Our idea is to create a space to chat, to share experiences, but also to share the voices of different sisters who are experts, such as Gladys Acosta and other personalities who are with us today. It is very important to raise our voice and to always lay on the table the struggle that all these indigenous women are heading at the front. Especially during the pandemic, the level of risk has risen a lot, and we cannot really deny that the situation, the militarization is always affecting our people more and more. Violence from states, it's a reality. And right now we do not feel protected. On the contrary, we feel exposed. And this is because there is a clear alliance between many governmental sectors with different networks from extractive industries. So to honor those women who defend their rights, and both the ones who have already struggled for their rights and the ones who are still struggling, we are here to listen to you. But you also have this chat on Zoom where you can write. We have social networks, so you can participate in many different ways. And the idea is for us to speak, to raise our voices, and to be able to show that we are alive, that we are together, and that we are struggling all together as women. It is not an individual struggle, it's a collective one. So just to finish on this note, I would like to light a candle that I will light it for all those women who have defended their rights, the ones who are not with us anymore, and also for all the ones who right now are at risks trying to bring light to our territories and who are struggling still. So thank you very much. And this light is for each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Teresa. Indeed, while we are facing so much risk, there is still light, there is still hope, and we can change and reverse this situation. So thank you for that opening remarks, Teresa. Now we will, as indicated in the concept note, we have 4 speakers. I will not go through their background. I will just mention their name so that we have more time to listen to them. So we will Sarah Bestan Dekdeken. She is from the Cordillera, Philippines. We're actually from the same organization. Then we will have Helen from Cameroon. And then we will have Patricia Gualinga from Sarayaku, and then Lolita Chavez from Guatemala. So they will be relating their stories. They will be responding to questions. This is a moderated discussion. As we said, it's a conversation. And most importantly is also for us, not just to know their situation, but also for them to share what can we do, what can the rest can do to support their work or lessen the risk that they are facing. So with this note, I want to call first on Bestang or Sarah from the Cordillera Peoples Alliance. So Sarah, as an Indigenous woman leader of one of the most prominent Indigenous organization in the Philippines, can you briefly describe how the government and the military is attacking your organization and its leaders as you defend Indigenous peoples' land, territories, and resources? So, Sarah, you.
Greetings, everyone. And yes, we have been and we continue to be attacked by the state, especially through its police and military. And this is worsening day by day. One of this is through the police filing fabricated legal cases against us. Right now, for instance, I am facing a cyber libel case that was filed by the chief of police in our region when I criticized the police for desecrating our heroes monument. And my case is just one of the trump up cases that we have been facing over the past few months. And in all of these cases, it was the police that have filed the complaints. And also, we are currently experiencing a widespread red tagging or falsely accusing us as leaders and members of the Communist Party of the Philippines and the New People's Army, both organizations that have been declared by the Duterte regime as terrorist organizations. And they have been using Facebook to spread a lot of disinformation against us, even portraying us as immoral people. Like, for instance, they are accusing me and the chairperson of our organization, his name is Wendell Bulinget, as having an affair and that we are evil people. So it has come that far. And the ones that are doing this are Facebook accounts of police, the military, and their trolls. And worse, these Facebook posts have generated a lot of death threats against us. This red tagging is especially dangerous because in our experience, it is a precursor to worse forms of human rights violations like trumped up cases, and even extrajudicial killings. Even when all we do is to defend our lands, defend the environment and our rights. And this has been happening and continues to happen, unfortunately, especially under the Duterte regime. It is also clear to us that the goal of the Duterte regime is to eliminate our organization. And they are doing that. One way of them doing that is targeting us, the individual leaders and members of the organization. Now
Okay.
we are especially alarmed because recently President Duterte ordered the police to shoot to kill communists, which puts us in an even more difficult situation because, like I said, we have been labeled as terrorists by the government.
Okay, so Sarah, with that situation is including, you know, this smear campaign against you. How are you dealing with this situation, and what do you think others can do to support you and and your organization and other women leaders in this situation?
Yeah, we are doing a lot of campaigning at local and international level. We have launched the Defend Cordillera Peoples Alliance, our organization, last year, because we believe that by doing this, more people and more organizations are made aware of the situation, and there will be those who will support in different ways. On a personal level, what keeps me going and not giving up is exactly this threats against lives and the human rights situation that is happening these days, because we lose from fighting over our rights if we stop what we are doing. There are various ways that individuals and groups can support Indigenous women and organizations that are facing threat. And one is to help pressure governments to stop the abuses. This can be done in through statements or letters. Support can also be through information dissemination so that other people and organizations will know and maybe encourage also to support. And also, particularly for the Philippines, we are seeking help in lobbying the United Nations to truly investigate the situation here in the Philippines. And finally, among our needs that we need support with our sanctuary, even outside of the Philippines or outside of countries, and of course the legal cases, because these are most expensive among all the financial or the costs. So
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Bestang. You mentioned earlier the possibility that that they will already serve your warrant of arrest
yeah.
anytime from now.
Yeah, so unfortunately, over the past few hours, I have been consulting with my colleagues and lawyers because it seems that the warrant of arrest against me is ready to be served. This is because of the libel case. So I was telling friends here earlier that I might have to leave you after I talk because I am currently in my home and I need to move out, go to a safer location as soon as possible, because here the arrests are very dangerous, especially if they declare that I fought back, and already thousands have been killed because of this alibi of the police that persons resist arrest. But I will face the legal case. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Sarah. It reminds us all that the situation is really dire, and we hope that you can get over this, that you will be safe, and so we can further discuss on the points that you have mentioned on what can be done. But on our side, please make sure that you will be safe, and just let us know, keep us informed on your case and what can be done. Because Sarah has to leave, is there anyone who wants to just say something before Sarah leaves? If there is a particular question to her, I can open this before she leaves. Any, or even from our reactors, if there's any kind of response or anything. Okay, I think we're all trying to grapple with this kind of reality, but yes, I see that a lot of people are expressing their support for you, Sarah, and their solidarity. So now we move on from the Philippines. We move now to Cameroon, where Indigenous women are heavily discriminated and are victims of all forms of violence and also stigmatization. And this is the context of why Helen, one of our Indigenous women leaders there, is also facing threats. So Helen, can you tell us more about your work in defending land rights of Indigenous peoples in Cameroon? Also in relation to the violence that you are and threats that women are facing.
Je suis Helen Ayemundo.
Hi, thank you. I am Helen Aye. I am from Cameroon, and I am a human rights and indigenous rights defender. I work for the Indigenous Peoples Network in Cameroon, and I also defend pygmies. As a human rights defender, it is not always easy to work because we face difficulties at all levels. In Cameroon, most of the lands are in the hands of logging companies. So indigenous peoples cannot exercise fully their human rights. Due to this situation, we have many difficulties. Indigenous peoples, and particularly indigenous women, have settled on the sides of the roads since the 1960s, and this has led to more difficulties in the access to land because there was no policy regulating their settlement there on the side of the roads. There are parks, there are reserves, and there are logging companies. So we face land grabbing issues from logging companies. Our complaints are not taken into account, or we face discrimination because of them. So as human rights defenders, we are threatened at all levels. Sometimes these threats are very serious with regards to land access and land rights. So as human rights defenders in Cameroon, we face threats because we give visibility to land grabbing and discrimination issues. We face double-fold discrimination because we are women and because we are human rights defenders. So the political situation is not well dealt with. Indigenous women cannot defend properly their land rights. Also, well, this is the situation here in Cameroon.
Okay.
It doesn't allow us to defend our rights properly. And about what our role is, I would say that this is a very alarming situation. We have contacted the media so that they give visibility to our issues, but we face discrimination. We are threatened at all levels, at the local level, in the administration. We are threatened from other peoples. So this does not allow us to affirm our rights and defend them because of the threats and because of the reprisals.
Okay, so Helen, with the threats that you are facing and including reprisal, what do you think can be done by other organizations, by women organizations, by the UN, by support groups. How can your work be supported in relation to defending your land rights and your dignity as well as women?
Okay, because the translation is not going on automatically, so let me translate to Helen.
Okay.
Bon, ok, Joan est en train de demander qu'avec toutes ces menaces, avec toutes ces difficultés que vous rencontrez, qu'est-ce que vous pensez que les autres organisations, notamment des droits de l'homme ou bien de défense des intérêts des peuples autochtones, qu'est-ce que vous pensez que les autres organisations peuvent vous apporter?
Ok, merci. Déjà,
Thank you. I would like to thank you for the discussion, because thanks to those, we as indigenous women in Cameroon are now seen as the same as other networks of other women networks, and we can show what the difficulties we're faced with. We want to even be strengthened in our women's rights and human rights as well, especially in all the groupings internationally, because it is a difficulty for us. We cannot get in touch with other women and other human rights organizations so that we can be supported at any and all levels in our work. Very often, we have taken steps internationally through the Human Rights and People's Rights Commission, but it remains a very slow situation because we do not actually have solutions. And we also want to get in touch with other networks defending indigenous women and indigenous peoples internationally so that our problems can be heard. And we do need support for capacity building and exchanges so that we can continue defending our rights.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Helen. I think that's an important point. The issue of capacity building networks and solidarity with different organizations who can support your work. So thank you for that, Helen. Now we go to the other side in Latin America. So we have Patricia from Sarayaku in Ecuador. So Patricia, on your video, so we can see you. Okay, there you go. So Patricia, being the spokesperson of the Sarayaku people who have successfully stopped the oil companies from exploiting your land, what is the situation now, or the threats at the moment, and what are the roles and contributions of indigenous women in this successful movement so far? Patricia.
Buenos días. Gracias por la invitación.
Hello, thank you very much for the invite. The situation in Sarayaku is that we are currently ongoing with we have a Sarayaku process, which is still ongoing, and we are awaiting for the sentence. This process we know has been recognized as successful, but however, the state of Ecuador has not really done what it was supposed to do after this sentence, and the state keeps doing the same things that led it to be condemned after this sentence. Right now, the Sarayaku territory has been divided. So what we have done is to divide the territory in smaller pieces. For example, there are now 10 oil companies with different spaces, and this includes even other nationalities of other companies. And this is a way to try to face us more, to fight more with us. Because before we used to have the majority of the territory, and before we used to face just one company, not many. And now we're trying to make sure that these processes and these violations of human rights that we have experienced are not repeated. However, since whatever was decided in this case was not applied, so we did resort to the Supreme Court of Justice in Ecuador, and we are trying to look for resources. I think that there are many cases that are similar to Sarayaku in Ecuador, but we have had the possibility to create law in the matter of previous informed consent, and also in everything that relates to indigenous territories for oil company activities.
Okay, so with that, can you describe a bit more on what the role of the women in this struggle, and what are the measures that can be taken in dealing with the government and the oil companies now, because as you said, there is still pursuing these kind of destructive projects in your territory. So what can we do, and what are the communities and women doing to address this?
Bueno, en todo este proceso, el rol de las...
In all this process, I would say that the role of women has been incredible, because this determination to go against these extractive industries come from women. And we have been the one that said that this was a definitive no. Sarayaku is determined to ban all kind of oil exploitation. And the people of Sarayaku has decided that there will never be logging or oil exploitation or anything in its territory, because we have seen how territories are affected when extractive companies arrive, and especially the access to roads that allow for a massive deforestation of our territories. So all these initiatives have been driven by women, by Sarayaku women, and the whole of our community has engaged. But I am very proud to say that women have been very radical in their positions, and that they have been the ones who have made this possible. So what can we do? We can keep struggling in terms of rights. We can become stronger as an organization. We can lobby before politicians. We can disseminate our news in the media to make people be aware of our culture, of our initiatives. But we also need to have a legal framework to have indigenous people's rights reflected. So I think these are the strategies and the initiatives that we have had. We didn't have only one strategy, we had more strategies, and international solidarity and alliances are always fundamental for this.
Thank you for that, Patricia. And it's good to hear about the strong leadership of Indigenous women in stopping this kind of projects, and the sheer determination to hold their ground. And also for highlighting the importance of international solidarity and having a strong legal framework also for the recognition of the rights of Indigenous peoples. So finally, we will now come to our fourth speaker for today. We have Lolita from Guatemala. So Lolita, as a strong Indigenous woman leader from Guatemala in defending Indigenous lands and resources from destructive projects, you were compelled to leave Guatemala because of the threats to your life. Can you tell us more about your life in exile and how you are able to continue your work? Lolita?
Bueno, muchas gracias. Yo saludo y mi corazón.
Thank you so much. It is, I'm so happy to see these kind of processes. My life is in exile, and that that has meant one of the biggest challenges for me as a defender of Indigenous rights. It's not easy for me to stay away from my land, my children, my community in a new territory. But I'm aware that I left my land not to end up in prison or not to end up being killed, and that gives me the strength I need. This is a therapeutic process, one can say. I need to see this as a therapeutic process so that I don't consider myself a victim but a defender. I am in different training processes and also communication processes and constant planning processes. I understand that I am a defender, which means I am a person with dignity, because I was criminalized. I was stigmatized, telling me that I was a terrorist against national security in Guatemala. That meant a huge challenge for me to be able to contradict what the state of Guatemala and companies were saying about me. But also, it's a hard life to migrate, to leave my land, especially in the context of COVID. Being a migrant means facing many more challenges for defenders. Many doors are closed to us, but other communities are opening their doors. Feminist groups, other defenders are opening their doors to us, and now we're getting in touch with them. They host us. This is also in relation to something which is very important, something that I have had to take decisions about. It's very important that decision-making processes exist, that we need to constantly review our life projects, what my profile is going to be in specific moments. I need to be lower profile. Sometimes I need to raise my voice a bit more. We need to think about alliances, mobility, visibility. This is something that has given me a lot of strength, but also a constant relationship with other defenders' processes in their territories. I have met defenders in many territories thanks to the efforts of many organizations. Wherever I have been, I have seen alliances, I have seen protection, I have seen safety processes of defenders. That has given me so much encouragement. I also wanted to denounce the Guatemalan state, which kills women. We are suffering torture, and we are seeing that Maria Elizabeth Ramirez, our sister, was assassinated. Her daughter is at Virgen de la Asunción. She was found murdered. She had been tortured. She had been lapidated, and she was killed with weapons. This was before the 8th of March. So the defenders need to tell this. I have been able to express this because we are not alone. We are creating networks. This has helped us a lot. Wherever we go, we find that reciprocity, that alliance, and I keep raising my voice. I need to keep informing CDH because I am still being told that I'm a terrorist. They have filed many of my claims against those who attacked me.
Okay, thank you for that, Lolita. Given your experience, can you tell us more on what measures can be done, or what strategies can be done to lessen the risks of frontline Indigenous women defenders? Do you have any?
Bueno, sí, yo creo que
yes, I think it's necessary to keep joining our efforts. We are seeing a huge experience by different organizations to create protection programs from our own identity, from our own stories, experiences, territories. We need to support these organizations which are providing that hope for us, the defenders, the migrants, so that we don't need to go to Europe or that we don't need to go to other structures in places where there's so much racism. That's one of the proposals that it's important to think about. Also, new international alliances with defenders. It's important to remove guardianships. We need to be explaining what is happening to us from our own voice. These communication tools are necessary where we find ourselves. Communication tools are even more urgent as solutions to protect our lives in all territories, researches, reports that is important to provide. We need to keep analyzing what reports are the states, the racist states providing, the sexist states providing against us, the defenders. And these reports are something we need to contradict, we need to debunk, and we need to stop financing the Guatemalan state for militarization. We need the UN to verify where funds are being allocated. The funds coming from Europe, from the European Union, because apparently they are saying that they are funds allocated for safety, but what they're using them is for the repression of our territory and other sister defenders of Indigenous peoples' rights are being stigmatized, are being criminalized and told that they will suffer my same fate if they keep fighting. In the midst of the COVID pandemic, we need to verify what is happening with the mining and extractivist industries. The wood licenses that were given before COVID-19 with a 1 year limit, but now they are providing these licenses in 2 months online. We need to verify these processes and claim against them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that powerful response. And you're right that we need to put more pressure to the government, including on how they are using the funds, the aid that are given to governments, as many are used to criminalize Indigenous peoples or grab our lands. Indeed, that's where I think our international solidarity and support is also needed. Now we've heard from all our strong, courageous Indigenous leaders from across the world. I think their experience and the situation that they're facing is emblematic. It represents the situation of many more of faceless Indigenous women across the globe. And from their stories, it's very clear that the situation is worsening, and there are new forms that Indigenous women are facing. And I would like to highlight the case of Destang, for example, and also what others has mentioned, is the use of digital media as a channel to criminalize, to stigmatize women. So we need to also engage and see what can be done, because that is now being used to discredit even in the Indigenous women as they defend their rights, as they defend their lands. And the other one the other things is the suggestion that we create the creation of protection programs, not only at the global level, but also at the national level as much as possible, so that women do not, or the leaders, Indigenous women leaders, will still be able to stay in their country. But of course, the political situation is also a determining factor. We've heard from Destang that at any time, she's facing risk. She's facing a great danger now as we speak. And this kind of situation requires more attention. And I think that's also where what has been mentioned, like, let's keep raising our voice. I think in this kind of situation, the voices of Indigenous women needs to be amplified all over so that the support needed is also provided to them. So now we want to hear also from others on this. So I would like to now to move on with our panel of reactors. First, we are, like I mentioned, we are very much privileged to have with us the chairwoman of the UN Committee for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. We have Miss Gladys Acosta Vargas from Peru, who can give us her response or reaction to the presentations, as well as on what the UN CEDAW Committee is doing to uphold the rights of women.
Gracias.
Thank you so much for these presentations. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. First of all, I would like to thank you for your invitation. For me, it is extremely important from our committee and in the responsibility of my position to be able to listen to your stories. First of all, what we need to do as human rights organizations at the level of the UN is to create these spaces to listen directly to violations of human rights suffered right now by Indigenous peoples, Indigenous women specifically. This is a privileged position for me. I think that listening means understanding, and to create engagement, commitment. This is what I can tell you from the CEDAW. There's a huge commitment to the rights of Indigenous women. And in this regard, I would like to make some remarks about what I have heard today. The situation is extremely severe. Each of the situations in Ecuador, Guatemala, Cameroon, Philippines, what I have heard is really serious. They have different levels and different ways in which they are serious, but they are all linked to a type of aggression that we call a sort of institutional violence. It's not an individual kind of violence, it's an institutional violence from states. It's an institutionalized violence that doesn't only affect individual defenders of human rights and Indigenous rights, but also all their communities, all their peoples, and therefore we need to look at it from a different perspective from, for example, other kinds of violations of human rights. In the first place, I think that Indigenous women need to be recognized more specifically. Their rights need to be more specifically recognized, not only as Indigenous women, but also leaders of their communities. That's in the first place. Second place, I would say, I think that they're showing very important paths for the future. Let's start with a situation in Ecuador. Ecuador has a constitutional framework that is really favorable for these fights. And I think the legal strategy in this battle, the legal strategy that was chosen was the right strategy. However, there are other places like, for example, Guatemala or Cameroon, probably, or Philippines, which might not have that advanced legal constitutional framework, where we need other strategies which have been highlighted today, where, for example, the way to express militarization, which especially in the Philippines and Guatemala is very obvious, requires other kinds of strategies. And they are doing a great job because it's international pressure which can guarantee that a government of this nature can maybe step back and open spaces for a better protection of these women who are in such a difficult situation where they have to leave their countries or they have to hide within the borders of their own country. So I think the severity of this makes all international organizations, even though I'm part of the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, I'm telling you, you need to really ask for all mechanisms to defend human rights in the framework of the UN. This convention, CEDAW, has its own limit. We don't have like urgent measures. We have a protocol which requires legal cases to be presented. First of all, presented in their own state. We can't intervene directly. The way we intervene is when countries present their regional reports, when Cameroon, when Guatemala, when they come to us, we will talk about this. This is what we are doing now. Every time a case is presented to us from a state with indigenous peoples living within the borders or living temporarily in the borders, we emphasize as a committee, especially when we listen to organized indigenous women presenting their reports, we present this within the committee, and we want the final observations of the committee in each case to have a clear guidance of what states need to do, the obligations of states and the things they need to meet. To finish with, I would say that listening to your stories is really revealing as to the contents of my general recommendations for indigenous women within our convention. These general recommendations for states need to really make it clear what the protection and defense strategies need to be in the case of indigenous women defenders of indigenous rights. I would like to again thank you for your invitation and for allowing me to share with you and to listen to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So thank you, Gladys. That's encouraging, especially your support, your continued support in pushing, making strong recommendations to states, because we really need strong pressure to states. And thanks for holding the line for us in that regard. And we will definitely get in touch with you to continue to raise voices of indigenous women, so that they are also heard within the UN system through your work. Thank you. Now we will hear from Ms. Karin Ericsson. She is from the Program Specialist for Gender Equality of the Swedish International Development Cooperation. So Karin, you have the floor.
Indigenous women rights defenders. And first
we cannot, the interpreters cannot hear Karin.
Wait, Karin, the interpreters cannot hear.
Sorry, can you hear me better now?
Yes.
All right. So again, thank you very much for the invitation, and having the possibility to sit here and listen to you directly. And of course, we are all affected to share Sarah's situation and what's happening to her right now. And it just further stresses the urgency for us all to address the situation. And as Joan explained, I work for Sida, which is Sweden's government agency for development cooperation. And addressing the situation of women's human rights and human rights defenders and environmental defenders in general is a priority to CEDAW. And gender equality is a clear priority in the Swedish framework for development cooperation, which has been strengthened since the adoption of the Swedish feminist policy, which also places gender equality and women and girls at the forefront. And CEDAW also supports and has partnerships with organizations and institutions that advance work on Indigenous rights and land rights on a global, regional, and national level. And this is done from different entry points and thematic areas such as economic development, environment and climate change, democracy and human rights, and gender equality. And I think these testimonies here also reflect the need to look at the situation of Indigenous women from all these different perspectives. We cannot only place them within the work of gender equality. We really need to unite these perspectives. And in order to address and to contribute to combating and preventing the violence and threats that Indigenous women encounter in their roles as human rights and environmental defenders, CEDAW have partnerships with organizations that provide both emergency grants and advocacy support to human rights and environmental defenders. So what is called for here and what that we hear, this importance to create these alliances is something that CEDAW supports, but we also know that these organizations, and especially women rights organizations, are underfunded globally. And our partners are alerting us that Indigenous women are increasingly facing threats and violence, and that Indigenous peoples are at disproportionate risk. So supporting and building long-term relationships to address the root causes such as discrimination, gender equality and socioeconomic and political marginalization and lack of land rights is key to CEDAW. And establishing these long-term and trustful relationships also improves the ability to respond to emergencies and challenging situations. And we also know that efforts for gender equality and all women and girls' full enjoyment of human rights require this long-term commitment and flexibility and creativity. And we recognize the importance of partnering with women's rights organizations, as we know that the role of the social movements and community mobilization is key to protect and promote gender equality and rights, which is also something that we have been painfully reminded of during this global crisis caused by the pandemic. And the global strategy for gender equality, which is also contributing to the implementation of Sweden's feminist foreign policy, focuses on global normative frameworks for gender equality and the enjoyment of human rights by all women and girls. Like just as Gladys stresses here, it's important to advance the implementation of all normative frameworks at place that can actually advance women's and girls' human rights. And within this strategy framework and learning from multidimensional poverty analysis, as well as from discussions with our partners that underline the importance of strengthening an intersectional perspective, we recognize the importance of continuing to develop partnerships with the Indigenous women's movements. And something that is key in the implementation of the strategy, the global strategy for gender equality, is of course to combat gender-based violence in all its forms. And here we can also see how there is the connection between gender-based violence and the extractive industry is, and climate change is every time more highlighted. So that is something we also want to look into deeper further on. And finally, I want to highlight that we support and partner with women's rights organizations, not only because they are fundamental to protect and promote the rights of persons that live in poverty and face marginalization and oppression, but they are also key agents in contributing to societal change. So therefore, the knowledge and the capacities of Indigenous women need to be acknowledged and their participation in all spheres of society guaranteed, both in their own rights and as actors promoting a sustainable future. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that, Karin. It's also encouraging to hear that the government of Sweden is actually prioritizing and putting money where their mouth is, so to speak, and practicing it in relation to achieving gender equality. And what struck me is also the support for addressing the root causes and establishing long-term relationship, because that's what we need if we really want to change the situation also of Indigenous women in the front lines. We really also have to address the root causes, and as you mentioned, the interlinkages of violence with climate change, with the extractive industries, and even militarism and the continuing misogyny. So that's really encouraging to hear and to see how we can continue to cooperate to also address the specific situation of Indigenous women at risk, but also the long-term solution of addressing the root causes where Indigenous women find themselves disproportionately discriminated. Thank you for that, Karin. So now we move to Signe Leth. She is the Senior Advisor Women and Land Rights of Land Rights Asia of the International Work Group on Indigenous Affairs. Signe, you have the floor.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to participate in today's very important event. I'm really honored and humbled to listen to the extremely courageous work of these Indigenous women that we have in the panel today. And our solidarity and thoughts go definitely also with Bestang right now, as she's facing a real threat right now. It's truly impressive how all of you are able to continue the struggle despite the very difficult situations you are facing. And from IWGIA's side, I would just like to express our solidarity with all of you. In IWGIA, we try to support Indigenous women like you with whatever limited means that we have. We are a small international human rights organization dedicated to promoting, protecting, and defending Indigenous people's rights. And we hope that our contributions are cementing the fact that Indigenous women at the front line have an international ally in IWGIA. So the way that we try to support come in different forms. First of all, we support Indigenous people's own organizations to strengthen their capacities to operate effectively. So for instance, Cordillera People's Alliance, where Bestang is from, is a long-term partner of IWGIA. We also try to link the different organizations we support globally for sharing of experiences, for strategy development and joint advocacy and campaign activities. Secondly, we assist in documenting your struggles, your challenges and successes. For instance, in our magazine, The Indigenous Debates, we regularly focus on Indigenous women, and the next issue will feature articles on Indigenous women in jail and the specific challenges that this is posing to the women, but also their families and communities. We've also just come out with a report on Indigenous women's leadership in climate change solutions in Myanmar. We come out with urgent alerts and many other kinds of documentations. So these are just some examples of how we try to document the atrocities that you face together. Finally, we are also advocating alongside Indigenous women for your protection, respect, and implementation of your rights. For instance, through communicating with the different UN mandate holders or by providing assistance for Indigenous women to actively participate in relevant UN meetings. And I think this leads me to another important point, that I think we should encourage each other to take a thorough look at the obstacles and barriers for implementations of all the recommendations that come from the UN. There are so many recommendations that are relevant to Indigenous women and that Indigenous women have really fought for and worked hard for to come out. So be it in reports from special rapporteurs or from the Permanent Forum, from MRIP, from CEDAW, from UPR, there are so many recommendations, but the implementation gap is huge. So we really need to figure out the barriers and obstacles for states to implement these recommendations in order to address them together. And that, I think, is my encouragement to all of us, to look into this gap and figure out how we can address it together. Yeah, thank you, Joanne.
Thank you for that, Signe. And yes, and this is also to acknowledge the continuing support of IWGIA, the International Work Group on Indigenous Affairs, to not only to Indigenous women, but the Indigenous movement as a whole. You've been our partner for so long, and it's good to hear also the efforts that you're doing more in relation to Indigenous women. And I would like to, yes, take up your comment on the implementation gap, because that's really a big problem, that while a lot of work are done to put pressure to the UN system, and the UN system coming out with strong recommendations supporting Indigenous peoples' rights and supporting Indigenous women, yet the implementation on the ground is not happening. And I think that is one area where you said we need to discuss what can we do together for those recommendations to be implemented to benefit and change the situation on the ground for Indigenous women, for Indigenous communities. So thank you for that. Now we have 30 minutes for an interactive discussion. So I open there are questions now, and we really put the program to have time for this interaction with the participants. And there are questions in the Q&A or comments, and I can read them. Some are comments, some are questions. But the way I will do this is to take 3 and then direct it to the speakers. And then we can also open for some comments from the floor by raising hands, because we have time to do this. So I would encourage participants to let's take this time to really engage in a discussion on what can we do together to improve the situation of Indigenous women, particularly those in the front line, on how to lessen the risks and provide the needed support for these women in the front line, the support to them and also to their communities. So I hope that would be the track of our discussion in the remaining time of this webinar. So can I request, can the translators see the Q&A? Because the 2 first questions are in Spanish, which unfortunately I cannot, I can understand. So there's a question for Patricia, and I think a general question. But the other general question is a comment from Anonymous. It says, I work for an international human rights organization. How can international NGOs best help the situation faced by Indigenous and land rights defenders in their countries? So that is one question. And the other is, what about the status of relation of production in the Indigenous women society in Peru, Philippines, Ecuador, and Guatemala? I'm not clear on what this is referring to in terms of production. Is this food production, or maybe the one who asked this can clarify this question a bit more? But just to throw back to our, and by the way, participants, you can also ask questions to our panelists, not only to our indigenous speakers, but also to our panelists. So with the first question, I want to ask any of you from the four, now three speakers, either Lolita, Patricia, or Helen, on what international human rights organizations can do to support frontline land rights and defenders. But that's the first question that I want to, if you think yeah, Patricia or Lolita or Helen can respond to this question. Oh, okay, I see Helen's hand. Helen, you have the floor. Okay.
Okay, merci.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je pense que
Thank you very much. I think that the indigenous women are being defended, and we are living in sort of very bordered areas. I was talking about the other organizations of human rights and those defending indigenous women more particularly.
Hello? You're cut. Hello, can you hear Helen?
No.
No, I think she's
pas des moyens ici, il nous faut,
I think she froze.
Nous voulons
avec
les autres institutions. À côté de ceci,
we also need means, financial or material needs, to have to be able to intervene at any time and at any level. So that is.
So sorry.
Ce que je voulais donner comme préoccupation.
That's what I wanted to mention as our concerns.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Helen. I wasn't clear because it was choppy. But we can go back to her for clarity on that. The other question is on Lolita. Lolita, what are measures of community protection that could be supported so indigenous women can find security without leaving their communities? Lolita?
Bueno, ¿sí me escuchan?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
En todo el territorio de IWGIA se están desarrollando procesos.
IWGIA in the territory, we are having different processes. So, for example, we have protection houses. And also in my community, I remember that we offer community protection to other advocates. But the conditions are not adequate, they are not appropriate. So there are different organizations. For example, in my community, we have the Indigenous Peoples Council, which offers this kinds of opportunity to forge an alliance and to offer protection. But for example, it's really difficult to get access to lands. Some of our sisters in the communities do not have access to land to plant the herbal medicines, which we really use to combat COVID, for example, right now, or to plant different seeds. So I think access to land is strategic. I think it's really important. And of course, we need the state to provide the lands that were taken away from indigenous peoples. And if it's not possible to get that to happen, because we would not have an agricultural reform, because the oligarchy has taken over the state. I think organizations could try to even purchase lands, or even to try to support us to get some kind of help with this. But there are also campaigns, for example, the Mesoamerican Initiative is one that recognizes those people who threaten us. So I think it's very important for us to create campaigns, but they need to be echoed at in some other place. Those campaigns against femicides, against the military. So we need an international echo. And for what has already been implemented, I think we have to map that to see what it is like and what capacities we have. For example, in Colombia, we have the indigenous kind of police, and they need to be strengthened as a body. But at the same time, they are getting a lot of experience in terms of defending their own land. But we need women, and we need feminism to think of a way in which they can really face let's say, this macho culture that we have in our territories. So I think we can construct this starting from our life model, from our spiritualism. We don't need Europe to take us from our lands to other territories, because they have a different way of living, and we do not need that.
Okay, thank you for that, Lolita. I have a lot of comments, the ones in Spanish in the Q&A. Can I request, Teresa, you're offering to have that translated? So maybe we can have that translated.
Which comments would you like to have translated?
No, not the Q&A. In the Q&A, there was a question for
the one
Patricia.
Okay.
The one, Patricia,
the
there
first
is a question.
one.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so that would be what do you think has to be done at international scale in order to treat what's going on at the national level?
Okay, so I think there are similar questions like that. But Patricia, the question is, what can be done at the international level to support the work at the national level in terms of indigenous
La presión internacional siempre ha funcionado con los estados.
International pressure has always been successful for states like Ecuador, and international solidarity as well. In the Sarayaku case, we used Convention 169 of the ILO to take into account international laws, and in order to succeed in our case. I think that always there are these conditions. For example, in Ecuador, economic conditions are really important to be able to attain justice. Because if the cases pass on to an international system, that means that there is no justice at a national level. And this happens a lot, and it happens to us as a community. So we do need sometimes international solidarity and support, and especially we need that supranational organizations such as the UN, the OAS, and others start really being vigilant to make sure that rights are being respected. And sometimes these organizations do not press enough for rights to be respected. States are many times the first to not to follow the constitution, for example, and to violate indigenous peoples' rights. So I think we have to be very vigilant at an international scale to press so that indigenous women can have their own laws and their own voice. Many times we feel that we are invisible in this sense, and we really need strong support, and even we need capacity development in order to understand what we deserve. Sometimes in some territories, we do not talk about rights, and sometimes all this structure is just made in this way in order to violate our rights. So we need to empower women so that they can raise their voice and say and talk when something's not right.
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Patricia. I think your points are really very clear. The need for international pressure to the government to respect and protect the rights of indigenous peoples and women, and also to generate international solidarity, supporting women and their communities, and to make indigenous women more visible, and to empower indigenous women. I think those are very, very important points. I see Gladys. Gladys, come in. You can take the floor. Yes.
Muchísimas gracias,
Thank you so much, Joan. I would like to emphasize something that has been said here and which I think is very, very important. There are many, many recommendations from UN mechanisms to the states. However, implementation of these recommendations is very low. I would like to say what I think about this, and this is totally true. This is my opinion. Specifically, when talking about CEDAW, what we do is to select certain recommendations for the country, and we give them 2 years to respond about the most urgent recommendations. And when we revise and review what the state sends us, we listen especially to NGOs. And I think it's very, very important for indigenous women to inform us when the states do not really comply with these recommendations, when they do not implement them. So I think we need a strategy that is solid in terms of recommendation follow-up. First of all, it's really important to have committee recommendations translated, especially the ones from CEDAW, to be translated into indigenous languages in each of the countries. And I think this is an obligation for the state. The state is the one that should be translating these reports, which should be making them known, so that organized indigenous women can have an instrument in their own hands which allows them to press their own governments to really fulfill their obligations in terms of these recommendations. Secondly, I think it's very important to go to the press. I think the press is really important to give visibility, and not only here we are not only talking about the formal press, but also about social media. I have heard, and this worries me, that social networks are used to attack, but there are also social networks that can be used to defend. So I think we also need a systematic development, especially when we talk about the youngsters, the indigenous women who are very young, and we need to develop this digital space so that we are able to have something against this very strong negative campaign that the states, and especially, which is very important, the extractive companies who are attacking the rights of indigenous women, because they are the ones who provide the resources for these attacks to happen. So I think it is very important to dismantle this network of support that is provided by extractive companies when we talk about developing these digital attacks against indigenous women. So I think that a strategic line should be this one, should be to this systematic access to the digital world on behalf of indigenous women, so that they can really fight these digital attacks. And I think that this will also make more visible what we call at the UN ecological violence. And this is not the violence that we already know, it's the violence that it's a direct attack on livelihood, on lands, on everything that corresponds to the collective defense of indigenous women. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Gladys. Who is speaking?
Joan.
Yes, who is talking?
Lolita.
Soy Lolita. ¿Le puedo pedir algo a Gladys?
Can I ask Gladys something?
Okay.
What's happening is that there's been many murders of women in January alone. In only 1 month, to the 28th, up to the 28th of January 2021, there had been 28 assassinations of women. I would like to ask her, because we need to make the most of Gladys' visit, if we can ask the Guatemalan state for an official report about the murders of women in this period, because the figures are shocking. Another proposal is that we want organizations in our territories to be able to defend and support strategic cases, legal cases, to claim against those committing murders against women. Thank you.
Okay, a quick response, Gladys?
Sí.
Yes.
A Lolita.
So I would like to answer to Lolita. Unfortunately, our convention of is only in dialogue with states when they come to us with their periodic with a regular report. We do not dialogue with states outside these reports. So with Guatemala, we are receiving a series of cases of violation against the rights of indigenous women. So when Guatemala comes to the committee, we can talk to them, but unfortunately, our committee doesn't have what we call urgent actions, which other committees do have. From the High Commissioner office, we need to see which mechanisms is the most appropriate for the case of Guatemala in the case of these 28 murders. It won't be this committee, but maybe another committee can do something about it, or maybe a special rapporteur in the High Commissioner's office for human rights, or even the working group for the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. They can put forward an urgent action. We can tell them about these murders of women in Guatemala. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I want to read out two of the questions in the Q&A. One is, how can an individual who lives in another country support or help the different indigenous rights organizations of the speakers? Also, is there a way we can donate to the cause? That's one. And the other one is the researchers, there are what the researchers, where is that? I think there's a question here on what the researchers can do to support, and also often we focus on external threats to indigenous women protecting their rights and those of communities. As an indigenous, I can testify of more threats from within our own communities. What is the view of the speakers and specifically IWGIA on how such threats faced by indigenous women? There's also a comment from Mike, which is useful. Earlier this year, both ends has facilitated a roundtable with donors and Dutch embassies on the situation of women, environment, human rights defenders, where local indigenous women leaders presented. It was all about their needs and how donors can help, for example, regarding security, capacity building, campaigns, etc. This seems to be a good form of fundraising we can share. So please share this, Mike. And in my country, Kenya, the main problem are having is lack of knowledge. I think Gladys have covered that. And regarding all kinds of discrimination of indigenous women, lobby and advocacy initiatives should be strengthened from all sector of society, especially for lawmakers of respective society. Okay, so can I ask our panelists to respond to, what can an individual do? And if there's a way they can also make a contribution, a donation? and the researchers, and also the internal threats. Can I, maybe we can get Patricia to respond first, and then we can have Helen and then Lolita, and also the panelists if they want to respond. After this set of questions, I will call, we don't have enough time, but let's try the two hands that were raised. Just a quick response on individual support. What kind of individual support can be given?
Joan?
Yes, Patricia.
Ya, ok. Nosotros tenemos una experiencia como mujeres
Our experience as Amazon women, where when we were persecuted, when we were threatened, we started a campaign, and we had more than 250,000 signatures sent to the Ecuadorian government. That was solidarity. These were individuals who went to places where International Amnesty was collecting signatures. Sometimes they come from social media. You can show solidarity through signatures. And sometimes you see our faces, the faces of defenders. This is something that is really easy to do. And you can do it regardless of the borders that separate you from us. And then there's the economic factor. There's many organizations collecting funds to support women organizations or supporting women legally to strengthen them. And it's important to get in touch with these organizations because it's difficult for individuals to try to support us directly because of the distance that separates us, because of bank issues. So just support women organizations, indigenous organizations, human rights organizations, and try to get within the system that they manage. This is much easier for individuals than trying to support us directly. This can be complicated by financial or bank issues.
Okay, Helen, can you have a quick we're probably having a problem with her. Because we only have 3 minutes left. I'm really sorry for that. Just a quick, if there's a comment from Manjula Barra, is that how you say your name? The one raising his hand? And Nadia Paula. Mandula?
Yes.
You have the floor.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Kindly be quick because we only have 3 minutes. Yes. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I was speaking on climate action as our indigenous women are trying to practice it by planting and then zero practice of plastic and all. So I wanted how we could support these women to work more for the climate action, climate change. That's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nadia? Nadia, you have the floor. Nadia? Okay, we don't see her. I'm sorry. There's so much to talk about. There's a lot of interest I can see from the Q&A and also in the chat box. Unfortunately, we don't have much time now. I just want to go back to the speakers and our panelists if you have some concluding remarks before we end this session. If you have a key message, what do you want the participants to learn from here? 1 or 2 lines. Lolita? Or Patricia, or
Sí, muchas gracias.
Yes, thank you.
Yo solo
I just wanted to greet everybody and let you know that we will keep defending our territories, fighting against extractivist industries. This is the way to go. Please never forget what our work, what we are doing. Follow our path. I'll let you know that I still want to go back to my territory. I ask you from the bottom of my heart to belong, to participate in the campaign for the return of Lolita Chavez to the Mayan territory where she was born. Let's follow the other campaigns in Guatemala. We are seeing campaigns against sexism. I want to ask you for your support. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Lolita. Gladys, are you raising your hand? No? Patricia?
Muchísimas gracias por la invitación.
Thank you so much for your invitation. I just wanted to say to all of you that our fight is their fight. This is not an isolated individual fight. This is not a human rights issue or a women's issue. This is a fight for our lives, a fight against the climate crisis, a fight for the lives of the future generations of the world and for the world. You are invited to participate from whatever corner of the world you're in.
Thank you, Patricia, for that very powerful concluding statement. Teresa, do you want to say anything? No? Or, okay.
Y sumarnos a esta lucha,
yes,
como lo
we
dijo.
just want to contribute to what to what Patricia was saying. This is not an individual, but a collective fight, but it does affect us individually and it does affect our health. So let's not forget to take time to take care of our health. I would like to say goodbye from Guatemala, like Lolita.
Okay, thank you for that, Teresa. Now we have reached our time, but I would just like to flag some key points that came out from this discussion that we have. The main messages of our speakers is for us to contribute in exerting more pressure for governments, for states, to implement their obligations, to respect and protect our rights. And second is, as Patricia has mentioned, and all the others, we need international solidarity. And international solidarity matters. When women in the community are facing these challenges, these risks, they feel alone. But with international solidarity, we can make women feel that they are not alone, that we are all together in this fight. And that is very, very important. And the third point is the use of media. Let us use media because it is now being used against women. It is now being used to discriminate and stigmatize women. But we should also use it to raise the voices and amplify the demands, amplify the campaigns, amplify the demands of women, and also the aspirations of women. And fourth is the need to do networks. We need to build network. We need to collaborate. We need to go beyond boundaries. We need to work together from indigenous organizations, women's organizations, human rights organizations, the academe, those in the UN system, those in government. We have to come together to address this crisis in relation to indigenous peoples and the risk that indigenous women are particularly facing at this time. So with this, I wish that I hope this conversation is not ending in this webinar. We wish to engage with you more, the international the Indigenous Peoples' Rights International, together with FIMI, the International Network of Indigenous Women, the Land Rights Now campaign and IWGIA, the International Work Group on Indigenous Affairs, would like to continue this this conversation, this coming together, this collaboration, and we will definitely keep in touch. And please get in touch with us, especially now. And I think I just want to say that Bestang was not able to join us at the end of our in the last bit of our conversation, but she needs support. She needs support in this critical in the risk that she is facing, and the particular support that they are asking is the campaign, the support to their campaign, support for legal. She will be facing this case, so she needs legal assistance. That means also financial assistance to pay for lawyers that will handle her case, for example. But more importantly is the continuing solidarity. And I'm really happy to see the expression of solidarity for Bestang, for her organization, for all the women leaders. And I think that's the spirit that we want to end this webinar, that we should continue to be holding each other's hands and be in solidarity and support the work of Indigenous women as they defend their rights, their lands, and their dignity. So with that, thank you to all of you. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you for your courage. And thank you also for our panelists. And thank you also to my colleagues at the back who are doing all the technical work. Thank you to all the interpreters. Thank you on behalf of the Indigenous Peoples' Rights International, from FIMI, from IWGIA, and from the Land Rights Campaign. Thank you and have a good day. We will be keeping in touch. Thank you.